full time here at St James's Park. Newcastle United have beaten Ipswich Town 3-0 to go third in the Premier League once again. Really negate that defeat at Aston Villa last week. 4-1 hammering at Villa Park. Could have really been damaging to the season, but they've really bounced back emphatically in that first half. Really was a really good performance when it mattered. Started was quite a poor start, I think, by Newcastle. They were quite slow, but the referee really ignited the game with quite a poor performance. They disallowed a goal from Bruno in the first half, took ages with a penalty decision, which Isak scored to put Newcastle ahead at half time. But really, that I think is why Newcastle won this game in the end, because the atmosphere was just incredible. In that first half, it really roared the team on. It raised the tempo levels. You can just hear the Ipswich fans up there. They've just been relegated, but you wouldn't know it from the way that they've gone on this afternoon. They've been really, really good, really positive, really taking it all in their stride, quite tongue-in-cheek, really, with their attitude towards getting relegated. It's been quite some time coming, in fairness, but they sort of did themselves proud in the first half. I thought made it quite difficult for Newcastle. Really shut the spaces down, but ultimately the class told in the end. Newcastle moved the ball quicker and found something else. The thing I would say, though, I think Newcastle have shown in this game why perhaps they need something a little bit different in the summer. We'll talk about a right midfielder, we'll talk about a centre-back and some depth, but actually I think the midfield does lack something in these games where Newcastle have to break teams down. And we saw Joe Linton wasn't fit, he didn't play in this game, and he's going to see a specialist on a knee problem. We'll see how that one goes, but Joe Willock came in and did okay, made a couple of his lung-busting runs forward, but generally he didn't take the ball on, didn't really do much to unlock Ipswich at times. And there was a point in the second half where he took the ball backwards, dropped back and played it to Sandro Tonali, and it was like, you need to be more progressive in that scenario. And I think Newcastle generally do need a player in the midfield to unlock these games. This game, as I say, was unlocked by Newcastle's fans. The noise levels that went up as a sort of reaction to quite a poor refereeing display, as I said, but that can't. But the team needs to react to itself, and I think, yes, it can go through the gears, and we saw that in the second half a little bit when Dan Burn scored, and then they created a few more chances and really took the game away from Ipswich. And that also happened in the first half as well, where Barnes was getting on the ball in better positions, Tonali was playing the ball forward quickly, and Bruno, linking up with Bruno. But when that doesn't happen, it's kind of the same sort of system, same way of playing, but very slow, and it's very easy to defend against. And I think if Newcastle are really going to progress next season with the Champions League, against tougher opposition, obviously we saw them last season come unstuck in games in that sort of tactical flexibility in Europe last season against Dortmund and Milan. They need something new in that midfield, I think, something different. A number 10. I think Eddie Howe's system is great. I've obviously been very vocal about this in the past, that sometimes they just struggle when the chips are down to break teams down. Today it wasn't a problem in the end because the referee, because, as I say, the fans inspired the team on, but also because the fans ignited the stadium, ignited the game. Ben Johnson got sent off and the penalty had gone, and really the game was kind of done, and Newcastle were able to relax a bit more in the second half. And then for the last 20 minutes it was a bit of a non-event, but the game was done, and I think Newcastle, between now and the end of the season, are going to be taking the opportunity to rest players and rest themselves a little bit. Isak came off again early, having done his job for Callum Wilson. Will Sula came on, scored his first Premier League goal, which was a great moment, and the sort of Gallagher end really serenading him. It was a fantastic moment. I think that number 8 position, Joe Linton being out and Willock coming in, it's much of a muchness in a different way. He's obviously very rangy and very good at exploiting space. Joe Linton's very good at powering through and exploiting space in a different way and imposing himself physically. But in a game where Newcastle are expected to have the lion's share of possession, in a game where Newcastle are expected to dominate the ball and make things happen, I just think that there's nothing really in the squad in that central midfield area or number 10 area that really makes anything, that really offers anything different and can unlock a door. And against a better team, and in other games when teams come and frustrate Newcastle at St James's Park, they might find that difficult. We've seen it obviously this season against Brighton and West Ham, for example, where there just wasn't enough creativity, wasn't enough difference in the team, and they came unstuck. And there was a little bit of that in that first half, as I say. Next up, it's Brighton away. They won at West Ham today in what sounded like a really entertaining game. I think that the home games are really the bread and butter. Newcastle back here in a couple of weeks against Chelsea. Those are the crucial games. There's 9 points Newcastle needed, probably before today, to guarantee it. There's 9 points to play for at home at the start of play today, and they've got 3 of them. They need to come back against Chelsea and get a victory. Then they need to play Everton on the last day, hopefully with it all sorted, if they can get a victory at Brighton as well. But that's where these games need to be won. That's where the bedrock of Newcastle this season needs to be won. I also want to say as well, it was great to see Eddie Howe back on the touchline. You really do see the difference when he's back with Jason Tindall. Yes, Newcastle have won 2 games without him, but last week I thought, in the second half when Villa were able to make those changes, there wasn't really much from the bench that Jason Tindall could do, and it didn't really. I think if Eddie Howe had been on the bench at Villa Park, it might well have been a slightly different. Maybe not the outcome might have been different, but the manner of the defeat might have been different. There might have been more of an offering from Newcastle. Eddie Howe said in his pre-match press conference that he left Jason Tindall to his own devices to really make the decisions, be manager for 3 weeks. He was back in the touchline, he was back at the forefront, and Jason Tindall, I think he's got himself booked today, and I think he's going to be banned for a game. Was back to his old tricks. If you notice, when he was manager, he was the calming influence, and Graham Jones took the sort of more vocal approach, and that, as I say, reverted to type. You really saw the double act come back to fruition again today, and Eddie Howe, as I say, made a huge difference, and he will make a huge difference between now and the end of the season. Joe Linton being injured is a big blow. Let's see how that. We're about to go in and hear from Eddie Howe. Let's see how that progresses. But he will see a specialist. That was confirmed before the game. And as I say, I do have concerns about that midfield going forward. Louis Miley came on today and looked tidy, but is he ready to take on that mantle of first team player between now and the end of the season? He might have to, because there just needs to be something a little bit different. I think Willock did okay, but it sort of typified his season, where I think he has gone into his shell this year after such a brilliant campaign 2 years ago. That he's been a bit of a victim of the progression of this team. I think from more pressing and aggressive to a more possession-based game where Newcastle are often playing in second gear. That's reflected in Willock being in that position. I've said this about Joe Linton before. I didn't think Newcastle particularly missed Joe Linton today, because it's not his type of game. I think somebody who offers a little bit different, somebody who can get on the ball and create something, would be a good player to sign, I think. And I think that has to take as much precedence, or almost as much precedence, as a right midfielder and a centre-back. And lots of people aren't saying that. That's the next stage of the progression for this team. Yes, they got through it today. Yes, they have got through it and done their jobs in previous games as well, and I think that's the key thing that I said I wasn't too worried about after the Villa game. That was the first game where you thought they were going to be up against it, and they absolutely were, and Villa fully deserved to win, and 4-1 certainly didn't flatter them. But Newcastle had got themselves into a position where they could react to that, because they'd beaten Brentford and because they'd beaten Manchester United, Leicester, and this was another game where they just had to get the job done, and ultimately they did. So it's up to third. Newcastle on 62 points. 7 more will most likely do it, possibly even 6. It's all in their hands, and it negates the Aston Villa game. But as I say, if Newcastle are really to progress beyond with this style of play, I think it's really settling in. Newcastle are now able to win games in second gear, third gear, without having to be at their best. That's a really good trait. But to progress further and become a top side, and to win trophies, and to make sure that they're in the Champions League every season, they need more ability to do that in difficult scenarios. I think today the referee set the tone, made St James's Park alive, and that really took Newcastle to the next level. But that hasn't happened all the time, and it can't happen all the time. They need to be able to solve problems on the pitch, and there were times in that first half where I thought Newcastle were just a little bit slow and needed something else. And the way that they play is very predictable. It's difficult to stop at times, but it's also very predictable. They need something else. So I would very much want Newcastle United to sign a number 10 or another creative midfielder, as well as a right winger and a centre back as well. Thanks so much for joining me on this video. Like, share and subscribe. I'll be back next week with another one. Cheers.